Welcome to the CaresLink podcast. Today I have with me here an amazing guest, Mr. Kevin Hunter. He is the founder and CEO of Collaborate, which is a laboratory consulting firm. Kevin, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
To get started, could you tell us a little bit about how you got started in clinical labs?
Well, it's kind of ironic. When I first moved to Florida 38 years ago, I was in real estate and actually built a home for the general manager and CEO of what was just becoming Navigant Consulting, or before that, it was actually before I did Navigant. It was MetPath, which ultimately became Quest Diagnostics. And so after I was through building this house, he's like, "You're the best salesperson I've ever had. Would you come join our sales team and help us grow what was a new business in Florida?" And so it was very interesting because my family had always been in medicine. And so it was my chance to kind of get back into medicine and healthcare and those types of things. And so that was how it started.
Did it feel like a natural transition back into that world?
I think, if you enjoy sales, you think you can sell anything.
Sure.
And so selling real estate or selling lab services was just kind of second nature. And then ironically, 6 months later, they asked me to take on a larger role, and I was ultimately running the entire market, and it was a lot of fun.
How long were you with that company?
I was with Quest Diagnostics. We did multiple name changes. But it was about 8 years. So when I originally started, it was owned by a division of Corning. And so we got great training and great education and those types of things, which was super important. And then ultimately they just gave me an opportunity, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I mean, we went from a $6 million business to a $500 million business in those 8 years.
Wow.
And like I said, I was just a behind the ears MBA student with or graduate that, ultimately just was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, I'm sure that gave you an invaluable experience.
It was. And it was super important that we had that being a division of Corning. We had to spend 5% of our time in education and training.
Oh, wow.
And we chased what was called the Malcolm Baldrige Award. And so there was a commitment that you had to make to bettering your people and educating them. And so it was just an invaluable education I got doing that at the time.
Okay. Could you point to a couple things you learned in those 8 years that led you to founding your own company?
Corning was, you kind of think of Corningware and Corning Glass and all that. And they actually were a very large conglomerate that were some of the pioneers, held the patent on the fiber optic cable, which became super important back then. But it was always about doing things right and being a white hat company, always being very honest and forthright. And so that was just ingrained in you. And that was invaluable because, as you'll hear, later on in my career, there's challenges that come up about morality and doing the right thing and all that kind of stuff. And so that was super important.
Absolutely. And we'll get to that in a little bit.
Yeah.
You also mentioned you're going to transition from a primarily sales role to more of a management role. Is that right?
Correct.
Could you expound a little bit more on that?
Yeah. And so, I remember the day my boss asked me if I would take over, and I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not a medical technologist and I don't really understand the billing process, and I don't do this and I don't do that. And that kind of led back to, we want to grow our own. We want to develop people. We'll support you and those types of things. And I had an incredible mentor, that was always kind of there for me. And so we would talk on the phone 3 or 4 times a week. I was always available. He was always available to me if I needed him. And I made some mistakes along the way, obviously, but it was an opportunity that I don't know that a lot of people get today, right? I mean, we were a new company in Florida that we were trying to do well, and they needed young energy, and we brought that.
Yeah.
But I was a newlywed at the time. I remember asking my wife before I took the promotion, I'm like, this is going to be a lot, and we're newlyweds. Are you okay with this? And she was great. She just said, go for it, And so it turned out to just be the right place at the right time.
Sure.
Yeah.
It goes to show how important like a good education and good support is in career development. Fast forward like 8 years later, I guess, what led you to leaving the company, starting your own?
Yeah. So, it was interesting because after I left, Quest, I actually went into consulting for a big consulting company that ultimately became known as Navigant Consulting. And Navigant was a branch of Arthur Andersen that had left and started this consulting practice. And they were super interested in me joining them because, they were just starting their healthcare and, had landed a big contract out in California and needed somebody with healthcare experience. And so I was the third healthcare consultant, in a fast growing, publicly traded consulting firm. And so I was the third or fourth healthcare consultant to join the firm. And we grew it through acquisition. We grew it by hiring people from competing consulting firms and those types of things. And so, again, just at the right place at the right time, and went from 3 consulting consultants to about 450 consultants. And we were a third of the revenue of a publicly traded company in our healthcare practice. And so after doing that, I decided to start my own business. And I kind of looked back and said, well, what do I know? It's like, well, I know laboratory medicine and I know consulting. And so I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. And I just felt like it was super important, for there to be kind of an independent voice to the healthcare space, especially around laboratory medicine, because, there was either people trying to sell you instruments or make a margin or satisfy Wall Street or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I said, gee, there needs to be somebody that can give some unbiased advice. And so, that was kind of the mission when we started Collaborate. And ironically, when I decided to hang my own shingle, if you will, 3 of my clients that were very large healthcare systems said, well, if Kevin's leaving, we're going with him. And so, it was very fortunate because I never missed a beat.
Great. That doesn't hurt.
Yeah. And I had, 3 kids in diapers. I have triplets at the time. And so should have been a scary time, but it wasn't. It was just like, let's go.
Wow.
So
that's like a perfect scenario.
It was.
That's amazing. I was thinking, preparing for this conversation, as a bedside clinician myself, I use lab results daily, multiple times a day to make decisions, and don't really think about the lab very much at all. Do you feel like clinicians underestimate the power of like lab operations?
Yeah. So that's a great question. It's known in the laboratory industry that like 80% of the clinical direction in which patients are taken care of are derived from the basis of the lab results, right? And so we think about that as, we think we're the cog in the wheel, if you will. But the reality is, from a financial perspective, it's only about 4% of the healthcare spend is spent on laboratory medicine. And so while it's very critical to determine the clinical pathway for most of these patients, I think over the years, quality's a given. It's expected. Turnaround time is always how to get faster. And again, I would tell you that during COVID was probably one of the few times that laboratory medicine had its moment in the sun, if you will. And historically, the lab's located in the basement of a health system. And the people just, they just do their work and provide the information that the rest of the health system needs to do their job. But yeah, I mean, they're considered the unsung heroes, if you will, of the health system for sure.
Absolutely. I can see that. So as you were starting your business, you mentioned a mentor you had previously at Quest. Did you have any other mentors as you were, starting out on your own? What were people in your life saying?
Well, again, I had the luxury of having some clients when I first started.
Sure.
And what should have been really scary it wasn't, for whatever reason. Maybe I was naive or whatever. But I always had the backing of my wife, who was very supportive. And then other professional colleagues that, I stayed in touch with from both Navigant as well as Quest Diagnostics. And, always if you wanted to commiserate with somebody, there was always somebody you could pick up the phone and call or something like that. But, it's important to surround yourself with, I always thought I was the dumbest guy in the room. I just tried to surround myself with people that were way smarter than me. So.
Was laboratory consulting specifically like a big sector of healthcare consulting? Were there other people in the space?
No, it's pretty much a niche. Still is. It's interesting because there's a lot of really smart people that have spent a lot of time in laboratory. But most people either lack the business acumen to do the consulting and are just focused on technology or the service piece component of lab, or they have the business acumen and not the technical expertise. So it was interesting because when I first took the job at Quest, you talked about kind of getting up to speed and suddenly being responsible for thousands of employees. I tried to roll up my sleeves and go spend time in every department and learn it because I wasn't a med tech, and so I didn't have that technical skill of the people that were reporting to me. But it was super important to make sure I understood what was going on and so I could try to walk as much as I possibly could in other people's footsteps. And I never tried to ask people to do something that I wouldn't do myself.
Yeah.
That was kind of one of my rules along the way.
I can see how your background in sales and like relationship building could be a big asset in this field because I can imagine you're dealing with lots of different stakeholders over the course of a project. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, so when I was at Quest, you depended on the people that reported to you, right? So we had, the people who managed our billing department. We had people who ran our IT department. We had people who managed logistics and sales and service and all that. And so we relied heavily upon those managers to both develop their replacements as they moved up, as well as educate me. And I mean, one of the things I tried never to do was to go in and act like I knew something and understood something when I didn't.
Okay.
And that was super important. And then when I moved into starting my consulting firm, I looked around and I looked at my competitors. I looked at what I'd learned when I was at Navigant, and I saw people that had big firms that, weren't making any money, but they were a big firm. And then I saw small niche firms that were very agile, very nimble, could move in the direction of where people needed them, and could kind of move in whatever direction they needed. I was talking to you earlier about this Stanford project that we did years ago. And it was one of those things that was like, it was a massive project. They'd started an outreach business and they were losing $1 million a week. So the year before they hired us, they'd lost $51 million in their laboratory. And it was one of those things to where our firm wasn't big enough to eat this elephant timely, but we had this incredible desire to fix it because we knew that every week that went by, they lost another $1 million, right?
Sure.
And so we were able to reach through different industry contacts and build the team that we needed. And we righted the ship and they were break even within 60 days.
Wow.
And we wound up ultimately selling the business off to LabCorp. And they actually paid them a lot of money for the business and relieved them of all these long-term obligations that they had established. And so, that's just kind of so the way things came to be.
What is the life cycle of a project like this, of a similar scale, like a large project like that? How long does it take?
So, the best part about consulting is no 2 days are ever the same.
Sure. Yeah.
And we've had 500 clients. We've been in thousands of laboratories. And no two have ever been the same. And so we have, clients that have been with us for 10 years and we have projects that we do that last 2 weeks. And so we try to very objectively meet our clients where they are, and start with just a blank canvas. And so while we have the experience of all our previous engagements, We don't start with any preconceived notions. We don't start with a PowerPoint template that's already 50% done. And so we try to, the motto is we're going to leave our clients better than we found them. Yeah, that's super important to us.
That's inspiring. Being able, I can get, especially in healthcare, is being able to see a need and meet it, however it needs to be met. Lab consulting seems to possibly have become even maybe slightly more mainstream since COVID. How did COVID change the industry?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Back in just a timeline here, I've been doing this 20 years now for Collaborate. But in 1987, when I was at Quest, the whole idea was we don't need to be selling our services to doctors and hospitals. We need to be selling to the end customer, the end patient. And we literally tried a billboard of talking directly to patients and saying, ask your doctor to send your testing to Quest. And over the years, we've seen, testing is dictated by insurance companies and this and any other thing. But the direct consumer idea has been there for a long period of time. And you try to figure out how to differentiate yourself and not become a commodity. And so I think that's certainly something. But I think when COVID came along, that was kind of a watershed moment, if you will, because everybody, whether you drove through a parking lot and had somebody do a nasal swab or whether, it brought clinical lab testing to light, right? And then on top of that, I think adoption happened when 23andMe and Ancestry.com and all those types of people started, the Black Friday sales where people could get their DNA tested for $39 and those types of things. That again kind of became a watershed moment and made it possible for companies like Everlywell, who originally started on Shark Tank with, that allowed acceptance to say, hey, I want to take control of my testing. I want to understand my healthcare better. And this was an avenue for people to do that. So there's different states have different restrictions, but there's something called direct access testing. So in Florida, for example, you can go, I think there's about 45 tests you can order directly where you don't need a physician order. And so you just see that adoption and people being responsible for their healthcare become way more accepted. And so I think between COVID and, kind of the adoption of direct access testing, I think has been big.
How is with all of that, with COVID and with the almost genomics, or wanting to know the direct access and people kind of approaching labs with what am I at risk for, things like that. How has that changed the consulting demand specifically?
So, we've always been consulting to the industry and not to patients or individuals. But certainly I think we've done a lot of consulting work to consumer direct testing. Mm-hmm. And I think that, like I said, this adoption, happened pretty much overnight. And I think people have become more interested in their own health, right? As you see in your line of work, what no one ever explained to us when we were little kids is, hey, be careful when you're on that swing because you only get one body kind of thing, mm-hmm. Right? And so I think there's just been this acceptance of, hey, if I do this today, it's going to benefit me 20 years from now, and those types of things. And I think there's a curiosity. People want to know about themselves and how they can be better. Right.
Yeah. And there's, especially recently, along with lifespan, there's a push for understanding health span, with an aging population, we don't want to get to, our golden years and be struggling with all these issues, finally able to relax, spend time with family, and be saddled with a bunch of health issues.
Exactly.
You mentioned a little bit earlier the importance of integrity and understanding what's right and what's wrong and making the right choices, and how important that's been throughout your career. To that point, can we talk a little bit about when Theranos approached Walgreens and Walgreens brought you on? What was your role in that situation?
Yeah, so this goes back to 2010, so 15 years ago now.
So where was your career and company at that point?
Yeah, so we started Collaborate in 2005, and so we were a 5-year-old consultancy at that point in time, and doing a lot of work with hospitals and health systems, and we were also doing a lot of work with like private equity. So we would help private equity do analysis around potential investments, or help them do the diligence to make sure the technology was solid or something along those lines. And so back in 2010, I got a phone call from a private equity firm out of Chicago, and they originally asked me to do a white paper on the concept of coronary care testing and what was going on in that market. And so they paid us to do this white paper, and we did a bunch of research, and then we gave them our report, and they said, okay, it's obvious you know what you're doing. Sign this NDA for us. And so we signed one with the private equity firm. And they said, we need you to sign this NDA with our target. And so it wound up being the company called Theranos. And so we signed the NDA that in essence said we wouldn't talk. It was a pretty strong NDA, and it was a 5-year NDA. So, 2010, so it took me to 2015 to where I really couldn't say anything. And so, we were asked to go out and look at the technology. And so I met with the Walgreens people ahead of time, and, they had a division that was really just interested in looking at disruption. And, Walgreens was very competitive against CVS. I mean, it was Coke versus Pepsi times 10, right? It was really intense. And so, they had met Elizabeth at a conference, and she had made these statements that they wanted to prove out. And so it was August of 2010, and we had a couple pre-calls where we had talked with Elizabeth and Sunny about the technology and what it was and this and that and the other thing. And so I was going out there to meet with her and Sunny, along with 2 Walgreens executives, to put my eyes on the laboratory. And at the time, we were still working with Stanford. And so one of our people was serving as an interim leader and running the laboratory at Stanford. Well, Theranos was right around the corner on Sand Lake Road. And so the idea was, we're going to get out there. We're going to look at the laboratory. We want to look at their technology, and then we're going to ask them to do 5 tests on us. We're going to draw our blood there, and then we're going to take the same vials of blood. We're going to take them over to Stanford, and we're going to do a small science study, right? We're going to compare the results. And the minute I got there, it was evident that wasn't going to happen. I mean, Elizabeth was and when I asked her, I said, well, Elizabeth, why won't you let us do this? She's like, I don't trust the Stanford lab. Mm. And I'm like, well, wait a second. You went to Stanford. Stanford's a high quality laboratory. This should be something we could do. And they never let me see the laboratory. And I think you said you've recently watched the Hulu story.
I did.
Sunny really did follow me to the restroom and waited on me because he was afraid I was going to look around.
Oh my goodness.
And so I probably spent, and it was just when really teleconferencing was becoming popular. And so we would spend weekly meetings with Elizabeth and Sunny. And right after our first visit, I'm like, I told Walgreens, I said, I wouldn't put 1 penny in this until we're able to vet the science. And at the time initially everybody was kind of going along to get along, if you will.
Okay.
And I just said, look, they're asking you for $50 million initially, with like $150 million more, over a period of time. And again, there was just this, and even I even had a conversation with this one guy, and he said, our concern is if we're wrong and this isn't real, or it is real and we pass on it, CVS could get it. Mm. And interestingly enough, at the time too, I mean, you used to go to CVS and Walgreens to get your photos developed. And it was right when digital photography was kind of taking off and they didn't need the big platforms of film development anymore at Walgreens. And they were always focused on revenue per square foot of their stores. And this was supposed to be the revenue replacement for the photo. And so it was just perfect timing of them trying to figure out how are we going to keep generating our revenue per square foot like we do. And so the concept was good. You know, a couple years earlier, pharmacists weren't allowed to give flu shots, and Walgreens took it upon themselves to go out and do lobbying and change the market. And the year that I was there, they did 30% of all the flu shots in the country came through Walgreens. And so it was one of those things where they were able to go out and create markets. It was a fascinating company to work with. I mean, really smart people and all this. But unfortunately, that they wanted to believe really badly. And it was one of those points in time where it was just like, guys, we have to be honest with ourselves here. This, you know, and it was the big question was always around at what point in time did it become fraud or, you know, and I think at the time, there was a lot of pressure on Silicon Valley to say things that weren't quite happening. You're kind of in development of, and so the question was, is there something here and we're just touting it to be bigger than it is, or does it not work at all? Right. And so again, it was at that point in time where it was like, guys, I got to be honest. I can't help you. And so it was this one into 2011 because they had me do things like market analysis, and we went and built to scale models of how we would do this in the Walgreens stores and all those types of things. And so it was about a year-long project. And I said, I just have to step away, right? I mean, it's not, I started worrying about my reputation if it got out that I was involved and it looked like that we thought it was something that was real when it wasn't. So that's 2011. Fast forward, 2014, Elizabeth makes the cover of Fortune magazine, and my wife says, "Don't you think you're wrong? You didn't see the forest through the trees. This is new technology. It's, you know, microfluidics, not to get too technical, and I'm like, no, she's not real. And at some point, the truth's going to come out, and I just hope I live long enough for that to happen. But I mean, she's literally spending time with Bill Clinton and Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and all these other people. And she has a board that was stacked with, you know, all types of honorary people and those types of things. And it was, I don't know, it was early 2015, and my phone started ringing from the Wall Street Journal, and I ignored it. He probably called me 40 or 50 times. Wow. And finally one time he left me a voicemail, and he said, "Kevin, it's John Carreyrou. I just want you to know that we know what's going on at Theranos. We're going to run this story, and unless we hear back from you, we're going to run the story that said that you thought it was the best thing since sliced bread."
He said that.
Yeah.
A voicemail.
And so I had been consulting with my lawyer about it, and I'm like, look, I don't want to get involved. I've got the tail end of a non-disclosure agreement that I need to honor. And he's like, yeah, do nothing, don't respond and all that. So I called him and I said, hey, look, I'm in a pickle here now. I've got to do something. And so I called John back, and it was finally my NDA had expired. And I said, and he answered the phone and he said, "I knew that would get you to call me." And he said, "I know exactly what's going on. I know where you stand on this. And your integrity is evident." And so, the first article ran in the Wall Street Journal. I think my name was mentioned a couple times in that article and a couple follow-up ones. And, it was just one of those things. It's just like, you know, unfortunately it got drug out for many years through her trial and those types of things. And, um, I was deposed numerous times on different lawsuits, and I think you may remember there was a Thanksgiving where I'd gotten subpoenaed on the night before Thanksgiving on a Wednesday and had to be on an airplane on Sunday to testify against Elizabeth the following Monday in federal court in her trial. And that will ruin a Thanksgiving for you, because it was just one of those things. It's just like, I've intentionally tried to stay away from this. I tried to take the high road. I always thought the truth would come out, and that, you didn't want anybody getting harmed. Right. And unfortunately they launched a pretty big project in Arizona that, there was a lot of people that were tested, and there's lots of information out on the web and videos and those types of things about what happened during that period of time.
With actual patients.
And ultimately what they were trying to do was they had regular instrumentation and they were trying to reverse engineer it to where they could use, a smaller sample and dilute the specimen. And unfortunately that just gave really wacky results to a lot of people. And ultimately the state of Arizona sued her and Sunny and Theranos and, got money back for the people who got bad lab testing out of there. So, but yeah, it just kind of boiled down to, not the 15 minutes of fame you were looking for.
Yeah.
But you wanted to do the right thing. I felt really strongly that I was trying to keep Walgreens out of a bad situation. And ultimately they wound up investing the money. They wound up suing her, winning the lawsuit to get their money back, and she never paid them, and ultimately was found guilty, and she's now in Bryan, Texas in jail.
Yeah. So. What's always struck me about this story is that, and even in the Hulu series, Elizabeth Holmes says, we like to move fast and break things, which is a quote from Mark Zuckerberg.
Right.
And it kind of speaks to what you were saying about Silicon Valley at the time. But those rules about, we make a prototype, we launch it, then we test and iterate. Yeah. That doesn't always apply safely to healthcare.
Yeah.
We can't do a half-baked product and test it with people.
Yeah. And this has been quoted numerous times. So, I told her and I had an argument one day, and I just said, Elizabeth, I said, this isn't Facebook. This is you're testing people. I said, you keep doing this and you're going to kill somebody. And I said, if you kill somebody, they're going to put you in jail. And her comment back to me was, they don't put people like me in jail. And that's one of the reasons why the federal government wanted me to testify against her case. Because they thought that she had been warned and just was ignored. But yeah, it wasn't one of those, that was one of my paramount positions, was that this isn't social media. This isn't something that this is real serious, and it impacts people's lives, and we got to make sure we get it right. And there's all kinds of regulations that exist today to make sure that lab quality is good. And they just aren't taking that into account.
What is the space? What is the industry like now? Could anything like this happen again?
It's funny. People say, could imagine how successful Elizabeth would have been in COVID. And there was some fraud in COVID, as I'm sure you've heard. But no, I think, to be honest with you, I think the industry we still get, is this another Theranos? Is kind of the question that people ask us. When they ask us to evaluate technology or something like that. And it's been really hard on the people who are trying to be disruptive and very thought provoking and actually pushing the envelope. So we advised a client, out of Canada, and their website literally started with, with just a few drops of blood. And I'm like, you got to change that.
Absolutely.
You can't, you got to change that. And so it's been difficult on the industry. I think people have now gone the extra mile to prove that this is not a Theranos. And unfortunately, like I said, that's now become the buzzword, right? the healthcare equivalent of Enron or, Brain Madoff or any of those things. It's lingered for a while, and it's hurt investment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think there's more visibility now? Like, is there a greater push from investors?
Yeah, I think that, there's been lots of discussion around, were the people that invested in Theranos, were they truly educated healthcare investors or not? And, the ones who really knew about healthcare wouldn't have anything to do with it or something like that. And so I think people are certainly going in with their eyes more wide open when they invest in technology today. And look, there are things that are on the way that will be Theranos-like. But we're still not there yet.
It's interesting. Right now, AI hype is big in pretty much every industry.
Absolutely.
Given what you experienced with Theranos and, AI also could, I theoretically present, similar issues. How do you see AI affecting labs in the near future?
It's certainly going to be helpful. I think like all other industries, we just have to figure out how to use it and use it correctly and not let us get ourselves ahead of it. But if you look at things like anatomic pathology, that's pathologists that look through microscopes and look at slides of skins or something like that. You're relying on, a person's eyeballs and their memory and their training to interpret that slide, right? Whereas, you can take all those slides, feed it into AI, educate the model, and it's being used today. And you can see that model is better than the human eye. It outperforms it. And so there's a place for it. Absolutely. But again, I think it's just going to have to be how we choose to use it. And then how do we oversee that testing, right? And so is it okay to run most of the stuff through AI and then just pull a random 10% sample and make sure that's accurate to further train the model? But yeah, there's definitely a place for it in healthcare. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of med techs entering the market today, as many as are retiring. And so there's a technology shortage. And there's just not as many med tech schools as there used to be. The industry's not as sexy as it once was. There's lots of other alternatives instead of standing on your feet for 12 hours a day, looking through a microscope, if you will, or running an instrument. And so there's going to have to be some adoption of that. And there's always been how do we do it better, faster, cheaper, right? And when I was running Quest, the idea was to, grow revenue, have a decent return, and to lower our cost per test. And, today we're at a cost per test that is super aggressive. And unfortunately, like I said, the industry, it's only 4% of the total Medicare spend. So, we're going to have to continue to innovate in lab medicine for sure.
Outside of, you said anatomic pathology, is there any other diagnostic area that is currently being AI is being brought on?
Oh, on the clinical side, you'll be able to apply that as well. They have something now called auto verification that is baby AI, if you will, that looks at predictive modeling and those types of things and can help there. But also we're using it on the revenue cycle management side. So once we perform the test, how we're going to get paid for it. AI's got a component there. And so, yeah, I think that it's going to impact, it's going to be helpful for the lab space for sure.
Is there, can AI be integrated easily, or is it going to take entirely new instruments, entirely new workflows?
So I think you're going to see, some high level things that can be very impactful that won't require new instrumentation. We use in this lab space, we use a lot of stuff called middleware. So it actually sits in between the instrument and the information system that does calculations and those types of things. So I think there's some middleware solution components for that. and again, not to get too technical, but yeah, I think there's far reaching things that can happen without significant investment. And actually should have some reasonable ROIs.
So in the next 10 years, what do you see changing? I mean, we've talked a little bit about like point of care testing. We've talked a little bit about like direct access. Do you think home diagnostics are in the future? Do you think like wearables, things like that? What's gonna become a big deal?
Well, I think wearables have come a long way. And I think that hospitals at home or people, returning, we've always talked about moving the closer we can move testing to the bedside, the better we're going to be. Unfortunately, bedside testing is more expensive than if you can move it to a centralized core laboratory. I think companies like Quest and LabCorp will continue to do well. They've got the money to innovate. They've got a lot of really smart people. When I was at Quest, we had a futurist come talk to us in the late 80s and said,
really?
Yeah, there was about 30 different lab testing companies at the time. And a lot of them were kind of regional or semi-geographically located. And the futurist told us, he said, as any industry matures, it always consolidates to three. So if you think about the automobile industry, right? Or you think about all these other industries. And so he said, in 10 years, there won't be 30 of you anymore. There'll be 3 of you. And the reality was it took 5 years and there was only 2 of us. Right. And so the consolidation was massive and rapid. And I, like I said, was at the right place at the right time. But I think with AI and technology, I almost think that there's been a leveling of talent now. And so like I was talking about this company out of Canada that we're helping, private equity backed business, really smart people, disruptive technology, and they will be able to compete at a worldwide level, because of, this new technology and those types of things. And so I think that technology will continue to improve. I think the industry is going to reinvent itself and how we're going to deal with the graying of our employees, across the country, and retirements. And I think that, I think people are going to take more and more responsibility of their own health. I think that's evident, that you're going to be responsible for taking care of yourself better.
As we start to close out, I want to talk a little bit more about your professional development journey from, the early days graduating school. We talked about how you had this unique skill set in both business and clinical labs and sales, and you were able to combine that to create your company. And we also talked about your unique approach to like integrity and not presenting something to someone that's not actually true, and being very genuine with your pitches. Are there any other skills or mottos or things that you live by in your career?
I think that 2 years ago, one of my children joined our company, and it's been really interesting to try to share with him the things that have been impactful across my career. Right. And so I think about, we have a stellar reputation. And you can't compromise that for any dollar amount, right? I mean, it's just all you have is your reputation, right? And so I think that, doing the right thing, and we don't hear from people that what we used to call the worried well, right? In our industry, right? And it was like, oh, they're fine. They're just worried that, things are going to change and they want to be prepared for the change or whatever. People usually come to us because they need help. And so, it's always been really rewarding personally to go in and help somebody and them appreciate the work that you do for them. And so, it's never been about the money or the paycheck or the name of the client that we're working with. And we've been very fortunate. We've worked with the who's who of health systems and commercial labs and all that throughout the years. It's always been about, like I said, leaving them in a better place than where you found them. And, probably 30% of our business today comes from either a referral or a repeat customer, somebody that moves from one health system to another or whatever. And I think if you start with that and you start with integrity and you meet them where they are, that's so important. And like I said, because I've probably been in 3,000 laboratories in my career, and no two have ever been the same, and so, and you got to be willing to step out there and be willing to take the contrarian position on a lot of things. And it wasn't easy, right? I mean, you think back about the Theranos thing, it sure would have been a whole lot easier for me to just say, yeah, this is great, go for it. Than it was they were always very respectful, but to mentally arm wrestle with Walgreens to say, I don't want you to lose $150 million. Don't do this. Right. And unfortunately I didn't learn that about it, and so sometimes you have to step away. You gotta be able to sleep at night. And that was always super important to me. And, whether my son continues to take over the business someday or whatever, I think it's, that's the guiding principles, is that we're going to do the right thing. We're going to help people that need help. And hopefully it rewards us personally in the end.
So. Kevin, this has been an inspiring conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. Thanks, Hope. I appreciate it.